Okay. So we are here in Lexington, Virginia, and we are on the campus of the Virginia Military Institute. Sorry, I'm trying to get situated. We made some dolls last night. My friend and I, when we were in the little cabin outside of town. So I had given up all of the ladies that I had made, so we were making a new round. So we have this, and I brought a basket of our findings, and it's kind of unusual today. We're on the campus of the Virginia Military Institute, and it is, I think, one of the oldest, if not like the first state-sponsored military academy. And again, we're here in Lexington, Virginia. It's actually Matriculation Day, so it's the day where parents are dropping off their young people to this campus. The school was started in 1839. Originally, in the early 19th century, Virginia had established arsenals around the Commonwealth to have these provisions, military resources in different places, and they were guarded. They had to be guarded, and this is maybe the 1820s. And evidently, the people that they put in place to do the guarding were not terribly professional and often drunken and problematic for the community. So at one point, they sort of petitioned the state of Virginia to fund the creation of a state military academy. You know, and it's interesting because I haven't spent a lot of time in Virginia. Again, we're here in the Shenandoah Valley. There's beautiful, like old ancient mountains off to the other side. And there's lots and lots of small schools, small liberal arts schools, and a lot of military schools, actually. And this school is really significant because of its age. Its outlook is very much about, essentially it's considered the West Point of the South. And it has, there's people, I think, doing maneuvers behind me. I don't know if you can hear that. It was the West Point of the South, and essentially tasked with uplifting the generals, right? The high-level military officials, and played a major role in the Civil War in the Confederacy. And it was burned, I think, during that time. But then even moving forward, many generals in the Second World War and the World Wars were trained here at Virginia Military Institute. And actually, the other direction from me, and maybe when I'm done, I'll show you, but there's a statue to George C. Marshall, who was the VMI class of 1901. And that's Marshall of the Marshall Plan. So I'm not sure if you can see, yes, you can see behind me over in that corner, whoop, there's a whole row of cannon. And so before I went live, I actually, I used up a lot of the things, a lot of the stones in my basket. And I made a heart out of the stones, and on the way up the steps, this is on a sort of a slope above the lower level where we had parked. We had to walk up all these steps, and as we were walking up the steps, in the crevice of one of the steps was a dandelion leaf, so the beautiful dandelion leaf. So we picked some of those and we put those in the heart. And then the next landing up, my friend found a walnut, but it was split in the way that it's like the little owl, like heart-shaped face. And so we picked that up, and you know, it feels like this is a task of rebalancing, right? And to me, those cannon over there, which date to 1848, and they were actually manufactured in Boston. So I think we like to think in the polarities of North, South, and this, that, or whatever to advance, but this militarism goes way back. And a lot of it has its origins and actually in England, in the Anglo-Saxon, you know, military imperial context. And so those cannon back there, the instructor for the cannon in the 1850s was Stonewall Jackson, who is sort of this legendary Confederate figure, and very much engaged in the battles up and down the Shenandoah, and ultimately I think died of wounds sustained in battle and became sort of, again, this mythic character. And so he was one of the first physics instructors here, of natural philosophy of physics. So again, we're imagining that the natural philosophy within the military context is destruction, like force and domination and destruction. So there's this force for blowing stuff up, and then hopefully a force for pulling things back together. And I think, the more research I look into, I realize that these physicists actually at this stage realize that love, that eros, is this creative force at the core of the universe in terms of frequency and wave patterns. And so it needed a counterbalance. So we put a heart, we put the stones. I'll hopefully maybe when I'm done I can walk over and show you a picture of it. We sprinkled it with oregano, because oregano is very healing and antiseptic, and try to rebalance these energies, right? Because like those cannon are very representative of the dominating force of in many ways it is a masculine force of dominance over the natural life. And then in the background here we have these old mountains with much wisdom that we're not so much paying attention to. So I'll tell you a little bit. Yesterday we stayed in this little cabin outside of town, and the people who had built this cabin, there was a walk up to a hill. It's a little bit out of shape, so it's kind of a little hot and muggy here in Virginia yesterday, but we got up and it was beautiful sky that day. Not like today. Today is sort of fogged over, but it was just brilliant blue and clouds that pretty much appeared natural, which is great. There were none of those lines out there. And when we got to the top, there's this 360-degree view, and the view was of 8 counties, they said, and only one cell tower seen from the top, which is good. And the person who owned the property had spent like a decade creating a labyrinth, but not a typical like the Ariadne's web labyrinth, but an infinity loop of love. So it was this double infinity loop that sort of made a cross, and then within this loop there were I can't tell if you guys can see me. Oh well, I'm going to assume you can. This infinity cross of love, and around it were these flags, and red and yellow flags. I'm not sure what those symbolize, but then there were these other sculptures that were sort of wire framed with hearts, like combinations of hearts and circles, and some had crystals in them. And it was like this energy. It was supposed to be an energy creating space. Yeah, and infinity loops. So, we walked along the edge of the meadow, and we gathered up some chokecherry and some cedar and some Queen Anne's lace, and trying to remember, there were some beautiful yellow flowers, and we essentially set an intention, and it was something that my friend Cliff has taught me about, like life, health, happiness, and open paths. Life, health, happiness, and open paths. And sort of that's what I feel like what we need. We need the creative force of the universe, the sacred part, and we wish that for everybody. Like, we wish you to have your open path. We don't like the enclosures, the control systems, the redirection of people away from their gifts and their connection to life itself into these cybernetic enclosures is not what we want. And it's interesting for me to be here today as this transition point of these families, leaving their children to train essentially for war, right? The anticipation of war. And control, that's ultimately what it comes down to, is that this has this long history, right? It has this deep history going back in Virginia to Jamestown, actually. And so I remember reading Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book on the Second Amendment. And we know that gun culture and gun rights is, I think, intentionally a very polarizing topic. Very, very, very much used as a number of strategic issues to separate people. Now, I would say my position is I'm against domination in lots of forms, and we're sort of to the phase of quiet weapons for silent wars. That I think the idea that we're going to have some firearm with a traditionally understood bullet that's either going to give us safety or protect us is misguided, because the weapons that are being used now are weapons of frequency, weapons of biotechnology, nanotechnology, mental entrainment. And soon the new empire those engagements will be carried out in cyberspace. I mean, they already are now to a certain extent, and we didn't have a chance to go down to Blacksburg where Virginia Tech is, but Virginia Tech is very, very central in the cybersecurity space. But really, cybersecurity is war for the metaverse, right? Like pretending that. And so what does security look like, right? Like, I don't imagine that you have, again, I can see both sides, and I can see as long as forces seeking control you have weapons, and you feel like you should have the same accountable weapons. Like, I understand, but ultimately the weapons that are going to be used are almost like it's mind wars. We're in mind wars right now. And I think the conversation around weapons is insufficient. But it's interesting to me. So Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book about the Second Amendment, it's very short. I'm trying to remember the title, but you'll know it when you look it up. One of the things she talked about was the legacy in Virginia specifically going back to the militias. And actually, I didn't realize it went all the way back to Jamestown. So when we were speaking at the abandoned insane asylum and forced sterilization institution, I was talking about the time we were visiting at Shrine Mont and the Anglican Church, Church of England, and Jamestown, that Jamestown was the first gun laws, really. And at that time, because they were in a war against the original people of the land, that it was like a death penalty. They had official laws, like if you gave firearms or munitions to indigenous people, like you could be punished by death. And then ultimately, the men were obligated to, when they went out in the fields or when they traveled, to carry arms, and then ultimately that you had to have a gun in your house. Like, that was the obligation of every Virginia male, I think, to have a properly equipped gun and powder and X amount. Like, that was, you could be fined if you didn't have that. And this goes all the way back to this sort of Anglo-Saxon time frame, right? The spiral of time. Like, we're not escaping this, we're in it. And if you see the barracks behind me, they're very, very Gothic. They have this very Gothic appearance, diamond pane windows. It's sort of Tudor, I guess. Again, Queen Elizabeth I and the Church of England and all of that. But this academy, even though it's a state-sponsored institution, it's even more sparse than the military academies. They say that the people who are who attend this school, they sleep on cots. This is less cushy than West Point or the Naval Academy or the Air Force Academy. And it's more intimate, it's smaller, it's only about 1,000 people. I think I read that the other academies, the other formal military academies. I'm in Lexington, Virginia at Virginia Military Institute. So it's intimate and it's networking.
What's the author of that book?
Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz.
It's called Loaded.
Oh, Loaded. Okay, so Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book is called Loaded on the Second Amendment. It's a quick read, and it's interesting. Like, again, she comes from a more left-leaning angle, but she herself was involved in the 60s in political organizing, and it also involved guns. So she has a really interesting perspective on indigeneity, and the use of high-level technology to erase existing cultures, right? I mean, that's what Jamestown was. It was an empire that was sent out by, John Dee and Raleigh to extend the English reach into the New World and to replace the existing culture and way of relating to the environment, and then to create this new structured way of dealing with the environment, right? And to defend that by force. And so I think these lessons are still really, really relevant, because what we're looking at in the metaverse is like, those of us who don't want to live in the metaverse, or those of us who don't want the human plus existence or the hive mind existence, we are in the position of those original people. Like, we actually have to understand the ramifications of that story, of that takeover, of that transformation of not only the inhabitants, but the land and all their relations, and where it's gone since 1607 forward. Because the transformation of this continent by the English is where we go next, right? Like, it is the digital empire. So I guess that's mostly all I wanted to say. Like, but I think these are all ideas that we need to ponder over. What is war? What does it mean to wage war on disease? What if waging war on disease is a war on natural life itself? what is our place in the universe? Can people who sleep in cots and again, it's a culture. The culture, what happens here today on this Matriculation Day, it is a creation of a unified culture, a culture that is willing to die for its ideology. Like, that's what the military is for. It is to, and you can debate whether or not that's worthwhile, right? The need for a culture that would die for a certain ideology. But it is those networks and relationships and the culture that is built that is like the gates close, then you are on into the new thing. You are into the cot world of the uniforms and the regiment. And I would say too, this relates to my discussions around ed tech, because I said it's a very different thing to train someone for chain of command than to be an independent thinker. For the most part, military's function, it has to function on chain of command. You're not allowed to question. Now, maybe the people at the very top, they can be the creative thinkers. And I think that's the kind of people that this institution, Virginia Military Institute, with the numbers of generals and colonels and all the armed forces, create. They have like one of the most largest ROTC programs. They create the thinkers, and then the thinkers tell everyone else down the chain what they're supposed to do. And then the question is we're looking at, I have like a little critter on my thumb. We're looking at a new world where all of us are being trained to be the people down the chain of command who are not allowed to think or have agency or engage. So I don't know. I hope that makes sense. I hope that like opens up some ways of thinking. To me, it's really interesting to sit here and imagine that this culture of elite war, right? A thinking man's war. There's a chapel behind us. This is a war, a righteous war. And how that goes into the metaverse. So I'm gonna try, if I can spin this around and walk over with you for a second, and I'll show you just the hearts that we did. I'll see if I can change this around. Okay, yeah, so these are the cannon, and again, they were made in Boston in 1848. So this is the destructive force, right? You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 cannon, and this is where it talks about the cadet battery, and I'll just read it. It says, in 1848, the foundry of Cyrus Alger in Boston, Massachusetts, cast the specially designed VMI cadet battery, specially cast. Each tube of the training guns weighs 562 pounds, 300 pounds less than the standard 6-pound cannon of the time. So these were the elite technology, right? They got cutting edge weaponry. The Adjutant General of Virginia requested that the carriages be painted red with black metal parts so that wherever the cadets were on parade, the public would instantly identify the cannon as the VMI cadet battery. So they've got their own colors. That's part of the culture. The cadets took special pride in their unique guns. Major Thomas Stonewall Jackson instructed artillery tactics with the red guns for 10 years prior to the Civil War. The battery originally consisted of 2 12-pound howitzers and 4 6-pound tubes, but one howitzer was lost during the war. The guns were issued to the Rockbridge Artillery and other units at the beginning of the Civil War in 1861, and they saw action at Falling Water, First Manassas, Savage Station, and Malvern Hill. Okay, so that's that, and then this is the little offering that we left. So you can see the dandelions and the stones. It's an assortment of stones. These are all stones that chose me. I guess they kind of chose to come here. And on the walk up the hill up to the labyrinth of infinity love, I guess, my friend found this round washer. So I guess that's like, maybe the loop of creation. And then we've got the little nut shells with the hearts embedded, and again, someone sent me some dandelions from Rochester, so I'm sprinkling them liberally. They're in the bur oak shell, and then we've got, this is a shell I picked up, but it has all of these little shells nested inside, and around these are dried flowers for my summer flower arrangements from the farmer's market, and a friend in the past had sent dried dandelion leaves and lavender, so those are all around. So, and we've got some feathers to sort of carry the intention up and out. So yeah, again, I'll just sort of do a walk around. These are these barracks. That's the chapel. I think you can see there. So again, very intrinsically linked. The righteous wars, this idea of the righteous wars. I think one of these buildings is the physics building, because again, VMI is very much about the engineering. And then you can see the old mountains in the distance. And yeah, again, just the barracks. So yeah, it's sort of castle-like, right? and then sort of what I'm just trying to figure out is, you know, are we doing the new war? Or what is this all happening? So yeah, so things to think about, lots of things to think about. All right, take care, guys.